So thank you so much again for being here today. And now I'd like to welcome David Troxel. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, Shannon. It's great to be here back in Kentucky. And as Shannon mentioned, I began my career at the University of Kentucky when it was just one of 10 federally funded Alzheimer's disease research centers. And I know our audience is larger than Kentucky today, but I'm very proud to say, Shannon, that I think I've been in every county in Kentucky, all 8,000 of them, or however many counties there are in the state of the Commonwealth of Kentucky. You know, it's very encouraging to be here as the new year begins. Of course, we're still so stressed by the pandemic that has been so damaging to our elders and to our society. I think there's a lot of good news ahead this next year. Hopefully, we will see the end of the pandemic. And thanks to my friends at the Alzheimer's Association, I'm also so delighted there's record levels of research funding. I think it's going to be really a tremendous year when it comes to the field of Alzheimer's disease research, treatment, and care. So I'm delighted to be here today to jump into our topic about dementia-related behavior. I think we've already had many questions come in, so it will be a very robust discussion. And maybe, Shannon, next year we'll be here in person, so I'm hoping that will certainly be the case. I think you've done more than a good enough job on my introductions, but I am delighted to be here, and I'll just make a shout out to my dear friend and writing partner, Virginia Bell, who lives in Lexington, Kentucky. We began working together in the 1980s and published a number of books in the field. I want you to also know that I've been a family member for my mother, Dorothy, and I'm delighted to also be here for Trilogy today as their educational consultant when it comes to dementia care, and thank them for also, in their memory care neighborhoods, adopting the Best Friends approach with something they very innovatively called the BFF program, for symbolizing best friends forever. So let's get into it, and we'll talk a bit about memory care today and where we are. I thought I'd first tell you a bit more about this model of care called the Best Friends approach. I'm sure some of you have heard of this, some of you have not. But this began out of my work in the 1980s with Virginia, when we began traveling around Kentucky, talking to probably thousands of people with dementia and their caregivers. Virginia helped start one of the first adult day centers in the country, a program called Best Friends, a day center still going strong in Lexington. And of course, back in the 1980s, we had very few medical tools. We didn't really have much knowledge about dementia. And so in starting this adult day program, there were people who said to my colleague Virginia, you know, be careful, people with dementia can be aggressive, they can be violent. In kind of a humorous way, one expert actually encouraged us to have our volunteers take self-defense lessons. I'm proud to say that in the history of the Adult Day Center, the only bloodshed, I think, is when a volunteer's poodle bit another volunteer, so there were no other incidents of bloodshed. But we started the program not really quite understanding how to help people living with cognitive loss. And so Virginia and the volunteers basically put together a program rich in activity, engagement. We learned their life stories. We basically tried to have kind of a party atmosphere, a social atmosphere, and we soon discovered that this was deeply therapeutic. We kind of accidentally created something called a therapeutic environment. If you Google that term, a therapeutic environment is an environment that's healing. And by doing this for people with dementia, I think we learned that there's a lot we can do to lift them up. There is a person beneath this cloak of dementia that we want to reach every day. So again, this model of care basically says that, you know, without an effective medicine, and sadly, we still don't really have a medical answer for Alzheimer's disease. I'll talk in a minute about pain and depression and treating things you can. I think the treatment for Alzheimer's disease and other dementias is really caregiver education, staff education. It's all about relationship-centered care, and in my philosophy, what a person needs is a best friend. And let me tell you a bit more about that. Basically, when we think about friendship, you know, we all have friends, and friends, we have empathy for each other. We communicate, we have fun together, we do things together. And I think we also really have this great connection to kind of make it a mutually beneficial friendship. We help them, sometimes they help us. Maybe I pick up somebody when they're late for work and their car is broken down. Maybe he'll help me in some way too. And so when we think about friendship, again, it can be healing, it can be therapeutic, it can be positive. And you see the person living with dementia, They have frustration, anxiety, fear. They don't always know where they are. I think it can be a very tough and lonely experience. So when we as a care partner or caregiver kind of reach out to them and demonstrate affection and know about them and offer reassuring, kind words, I think it helps us overcome a lot of the challenges for dementia. And so this approach about socialization, activity, and learning some of the do's and don'ts about care are some of the things we'll talk about today with Barbara's support as well. So again, I want to shout out to my friends at Trilogy for their innovation, for their kindness. When I just got off a phone call with about 25 of their leaders, and I love the warmth and empathy that comes with quality care. So thank you again, Trilogy, for sponsoring the program today. So as I think about the topic of behavior and dementia, I wanted to start with my third bullet on this slide here and say that it's a myth that all persons with dementia are aggressive. In fact, my own mother, Dorothy, was what I would call pleasantly confused. She was very kind and really did not have some of this aggressive behavior. But just like any of us can get impatient or frustrated, imagine you're stuck in traffic and you're late for an appointment, or you're in line to order at a restaurant and it's just going very slow. I think all of us, we're only human, we have these moments of frustration, anger, and angst. So do people living with cognitive loss. So I think one is we want to understand that behavior sometimes is normal. I know for myself, one time, years and years ago, before international cell phones, I got lost in Tokyo, Japan. And I was actually there for a meeting, and I was trying to talk to people. They didn't speak English. I was trying to use money, and I didn't really know how it worked. I tried to actually use a payphone to have someone come and help me, pick me up from the hotel, and I couldn't get the telephone to work. And I was having really a lot of angst and fear, and it occurred to me that in so many ways, me being lost in a foreign country, a tourist where I don't speak the language, is almost like the day-to-day life of people living with Alzheimer's disease. So again, as we think about this topic of dementia and behavior, I think that first bullet on the slide here is something I want you to pay attention to, is that when you've met one person with Alzheimer's disease or other dementia, I think you've just met one person with dementia. Everybody is a little bit different. There's not a one-size-fits-all approach. And so as you think about your mother or father, husband, wife, partner, whoever you're concerned about, if someone says to you, well, everybody with dementia, ... I think the Alzheimer's Association and myself, many other people who really embrace contemporary dementia care realize that we want to individualize care, make this individualized plan. So sophisticated providers understand this, and they advocate for something we could call strengths-based or abilities-based care programming. So one tip I have for many of you, even some of you who might be pretty down right now and frustrated and sad about your situation, as hard as it is, try to think about the positives. Instead of focusing on the 12 or 15 or 20 things mom can no longer do, try to focus on the 2 or 3 or 4 things she still can do, okay? I work with families all the time. David, mother can't, and then we discover she still loves music. So let's build more on music. We discover she likes to be outdoors on a nice day. We discover she likes to garden, even if she's not very good at it. These are the kinds of things we begin to kind of shift and approach our role as a caregiver. So again, individualized care, recognize that not every behavior is necessarily aggression, but we do certainly want to talk about when things go wrong. Because dementia-related behavior can be triggered by the symptoms of dementia, and it can be very challenging for families and professionals. I'll tell a little Kentucky story on myself. When I first moved here, I moved here from New Jersey and California, and I was at the Sanders Brown Center on Aging, and a caregiver said, you know, David, I'm having a terrible time. The ox is in the ditch. Now, I'd never heard that phrase before, being from New Jersey and California, and I guess it's an old Kentucky phrase where, you know, when the ox is pulling the plow, and if the ox gets into the ditch, the plow gets into the ditch, and it means basically you're having a terrible day. So the caregiver said, the ox is in the ditch, and I said to her, well, is the ox okay? I thought she really had an ox that had fallen into the ditch. So needless to say, that was a very embarrassing start to my first few days in Kentucky. So again, let's think about some of these difficult behaviors now and how we help, because there are times when you have some issues. What do you do as a caregiver or care partner when the person's angry, agitated, deeply confused, delusional, paranoid, sad, or withdrawn? They're wanting to walk out the front door on a bitter cold night in pajamas. How do we deal with some of these issues? Well, between Barbara and myself, we hope we'll give you some answers. I think, first of all, I always want to do a shout out to the Alzheimer's Association. They have an 800 toll-free number. They've got support groups. So if you feel like your ox is in the ditch, that certainly is one place to start. But hopefully we'll give you some ideas today. How do you approach a situation with a person who simply says no to almost everything? They're maybe apathetic. How do we get around some of these issues? And what can we do to prevent aggressive behaviors when they do happen? So again, keep in mind my kind of earlier remarks as we go forward that I do think people with dementia are just like the rest of us in so many ways. And some of these behaviors are triggered by the environment or things that any of us might have if we were in the situation. I think having a calm, steady approach to these behaviors as you go forward also can be very, very helpful. So let's start with what doesn't work. Sometimes when I have a problem, I'll think about what doesn't work. I'm going to take a moment to talk about these psychotropic medications that sometimes physicians prescribe. And I think there's a challenge when it comes to these heavy-duty psychotropic medications with elders, particularly elders with dementia. So here's the kind of bottom line, is that these medications can be helpful when someone has a behavior that's maybe dangerous to themselves or dangerous to others. The challenge is these medications don't work very well and they have a lot of side effects. To use an old nursing phrase, I guess if you are using these, evaluate them regularly, but start low and go slow. Because the challenge with these medications is, again, the effectiveness. We're not really believing that they can often do that good a job. They can have serious side effects, a much greater risk for falling down. When someone's sedated, they're not moving as well. They can be more at risk for things like UTIs. And again, that fall risk can be very serious. Particularly things like the atypical antipsychotics, things like Seroquel, which again can save the day in certain occasions, can have some heart and cardiovascular risk. So again, be careful with these behaviors. And when we think about pain and depression that we'll be talking more about, be aware that behavior can be triggered by these things. And if you sedate someone, you might miss the most obvious things. For example, if I wake up in the morning and have a terrible toothache, maybe I know that I'm getting a deep infection, I can pick up the phone or go on my computer and call my dentist and say, hey, I have this terrible tooth pain. I think something's just blowing up on me. Can I sneak in and can you get me in? But you see, when someone has cognitive loss, they may not be able to say, nurse, my tooth hurts. I need to go to a dentist. They may not be able to say that to their husband or wife, right? But instead, they're experiencing pain. Now, how are any of us when it comes to pain? I would argue that pain causes us to withdraw, not eat, get cranky, get irritable. Maybe a person with a terrible toothache that we've missed slaps his caregiver because, again, he's agitated, right? We want to make sure we're seeing that underlying cause, and these medications can sometimes mask them. So I love my friend and colleague who's here with me today, Rhonda, from Trilogy. She, as a very distinguished nurse and leader, also says, as much as these medicines can be helpful in certain cases, that at Trilogy Health, we embrace the vision that hugs are better than drugs, which I think might even be a good byline for our whole conversation today about behavior. Okay, so managing difficult situations. I guess first of all, I think empathy is very important. When you are having a family member, let's say they're repeating themselves over and over again, or maybe you have a person in assisted living, they're taking things into their room and hoarding things. Someone who wants to be at the front door all the time and go. I think it's important not to be blaming. We're all human. We get frustrated ourselves as caregivers. But behavior really isn't just good or bad, it's just behavior. So have empathy, that old phrase, walk a mile in someone's shoes, because all of us have good days and bad days, including people with dementia. So I think people with dementia, we want to understand that the world they're living in is a tough one. They're trying to make sense of things. They're probably fatigued and exhausted by the end of the day, just trying to figure out where they are and what's happening around them. I think people with dementia can be less resilient, not be able to cope with illness, anxiety, pain, emotional upset the way many of us can. One little tip I have for you, by the way, that's not in the formal presentation, but watch your television and social media. I think there's so much negative news today. Be sure that you don't have your CNN or channel on 24/7 with the latest earthquake, flood, or pandemic disaster. I think sometimes people with dementia, a little worry can grow into a big fear. So try to channel that and not be so involved with the news 24/7. That's probably good advice for all of us now that I think about it. So again, empathy. What is it like to have Alzheimer's disease? Well, a dear friend of Virginia Bell and mine, who was one of the first people we worked with in Kentucky in the 1980s, was a retired nurse named Rebecca Riley. She was a younger onset person with dementia, diagnosed in her 50s. She was actually teaching at a nursing school. They changed all the curriculum, and she couldn't quite figure out the new curriculum, and this was sort of her first sign that something was going on. We actually asked Rebecca way back in the 1980s to keep a written diary of her experience, and here are some things she said. I can't say what I want. I'm afraid I can't express my thoughts in words, thus I remain silent and become depressed. I feel that people turn me off because I cannot express myself. And probably my all-time favorite, she says, I dislike social workers, nurses, and friends who do not treat me as a real person. I think that last one has stayed with me for 25 plus years because it reminds me that we want to treat people with dementia with respect and never treat them like there's nobody there. You want to not talk about them in front of them. You want to always kind of keep this going. And so I think, again, talking to people who have dementia, you can understand some of their sensitivities and fears. Even simple things like giving them choices. With my mother, Dorothy, I used to say, Mom, would you like to wear the blue sweater today or the red sweater today? And she would say red. Now, she almost always said red, but I think giving someone a choice, even a simple choice, can help them feel more in charge, more empowered with their life. So again, things like that can be very helpful in sort of understanding this lived experience with dementia. And again, not blaming or labeling the behavior, it's the disease, not the person, I think is very powerful. Now, here's a slide from the 1980s from a woman that Virginia Bell and I loved. We had permission to use all these pictures, Patricia, who was at our day center. Patricia was a very distinguished and talented, I'd almost call her a folk artist. She was very faith-based, and she had damage that affected her communication center of her brain, and she would sometimes cry out, kind of an audible, ah. Now, at our adult day center, the volunteers, of course, knew what was up, but you can imagine this was actually a behavior that could be agitating to the other people with dementia at the day program. So we were very puzzled by this, and it's a remark, back in the 80s, I think it's a testament, a remark to Virginia Bell's creativity, because we never wanted to give up. We always wanted to dig deep into someone's life story and understand kind of who they are, what they're about, and how to help. Well, we knew Patricia had been an artist. We also knew she was very faith-based and loved music and loved Christian music. So we discovered that when we set up a little table for her to do her art projects, and when she would listen, maybe even over headphones, to religious music, it was quite extraordinary. Her audible noises, her crying out would completely stop, sometimes for an hour or two at a time. So to me, it's a great little mini case study about how when you have a behavior, probably a lesser program might have discharged her. Oh, you're just too disruptive. But you see, when you dig into the life story, when you really look into someone's past, this is how you can get some ideas about things they still enjoy that can help them feel safe, secure, and valued. I think all very powerful. So I like to think of it as we think about memory care and behaviors, that I think all of us have to kind of put on our Sherlock Holmes hat and become a detective and look for things that might be triggering the behavior. Not always. Sometimes these behaviors are hard to follow. But I have to tell you, I think 70, 80, and on a good day, even 90% of the time, if you kind of think through, why did that caregiver get slapped? What happened? Well, maybe he entered the room in assisted living and startled the person. Maybe the person had pain. Maybe they were hungry. There were other issues. Often you can kind of be a detective and figure out some root causes, okay? So again, most behaviors have a trigger or some event, situation, or feeling that caused the behavior to happen. Keep an eye out for clues. This next bullet, I think, is really important. Is this behavior new or long-standing? Okay? I remember being at a support group once, and one of the people said to me, David, my mother's angry and paranoid and difficult and challenging. And I said, oh gosh, well, what was she like before dementia? And the caregiver said, angry, delusional, paranoid, and challenging. So mother kind of had always had some of these tendencies. Now, interestingly enough, when you get dementia, you're kind of rolling back a bit. I've had people who've been kind of ferocious, challenging people really become much more sweet-natured as their dementia advances. Maybe they've forgotten some of the tough things that have happened to them into their life. But sometimes when you have a long-standing behavior, if it's still going on, it is difficult to change. Now, let's say this sort of angry, difficult person had really been just very sweet-natured and happy, and now this behavior was happening. That's the one you want to double down on and really work hard. If this is a new behavior, maybe it is something we can change. And of course, we also want to look about when it happens, time of day, day of the week, certain situations. Maybe someone really falls apart after a family visit with the grandchildren, perhaps is just overstimulating us too much as well. So again, if it's a new behavior, what changes have happened recently? Is there an injury, a change in a room in assisted living, staffing changes, medication changes, etc.? So to recap, if someone has a long-standing behavior that's getting worse, still you want to try to approach them with music and art and try to look at their life story for things they might enjoy. If it's a brand new behavior, that's when you want to look for medical causes and certain triggers because we hopefully can change that course, okay? Again, behavior communicates a message. Spend some time with your family or with other helpers to figure out what that message might be. Now, what are some of the triggers? Okay. Medical causes including depression and pain. I'm going to pause for a moment and talk about depression and pain. The Alzheimer's Association suggests that about 40% of people who have Alzheimer's disease will have an experience with depression during the time of their illness. And there's actually research dating back to the 1950s that says people who have untreated long histories of clinical depression are at greater risk for cognitive illness or disorders later in life. So depression and Alzheimer's, depression and dementia kind of are fellow travelers. We don't even totally understand why. There's evidence, again, that if you have a long history of depression that's particularly untreated, it puts you at greater risk for even Alzheimer's disease. So you want to watch for depression. There are certain depression scales you can Google that are easy to do, but I think depression, to me, you kind of know it when you see it. Maybe your mother's been pretty happy and doing well, and now the cat jumps up on her lap and she just has a very flat expression. Talk to your doctor, deal with depression, because if someone's depressed and demented, it really is a blow. It's hard to get them functioning in a very positive way. Depression, pain, again, I've mentioned toothaches, but pain, I think, is often a core cause of this really kind of wild, aberrant behavior. When you hear that someone's kind of trashed their room, if they're running up and down a hallway, if their behavior is really imploded on you, I think that can often be pain. Of course, sometimes urinary tract infection can also be an issue. Medication issues, too much, too little, what are they taking? I think this is an area, particularly if you have a family member who's living by themselves. It's very hard, I think, to live by yourself when you have Alzheimer's, even early on. We could do a whole other talk about even risk around financial abuse and bogus Canadian lotteries, things like that. But also, even when you've set up mom's pill box, it's really hard for them to take it correctly. They may be taking things over the counter that aren't appropriate. So watch for medication issues. They can trigger issues. Unmet needs, food, again, exercise, socialization. I think loneliness and isolation can be really a root cause of behavior. And the environment. Is it dark? Is it cluttered? I've had people who've had issues around paranoia and lots of challenging behaviors. You go to their house, the lighting's poor, the house is kind of cluttered. I think it can very much trigger some of these delusions or fixed false ideas that often come hand to hand with Alzheimer's disease and these other dementias. Medical triggers, I think we've covered most of this, but I want to just reiterate. Alzheimer's disease, my mother's neurologist, Dr. Bob Harbaugh in Santa Barbara, I thought he had a beautiful phrase. He said, Alzheimer's disease in so many ways is like a slow and lazy river. It's like a slow and lazy river. So sudden changes, again, doesn't mean that mom has gone to stage 7B of dementia last night at 10 o'clock. It means that she's ill or having some pain. Again, pain is that common culprit to behavior, again, and depression. So these are all key areas I want you to look for as a family member. And again, just to go back for 1 second here, these are treatable. Alzheimer's disease really is not treatable. Most of the dementias are slow, progressive, and irreversible. You want to treat things you can treat, okay? Very, very important. You want to keep the person as physically healthy as possible with exercise, good food, nutrition, good medical care, the proper meds. Make sure that they're not on too many medications. Dr. Jeff Cummings, who's now at Mayo Clinic, he's at the Cleveland Clinic, Dr. Jeff Cummings, who started off at UCLA. I heard him speak a few years ago. He said the #1 cause of death for people with Alzheimer's disease is aspiration pneumonia, that swallowing reflex that begins to suffer. So again, get mom and dad on the minimal number of medications, I think is really a good goal for you for maybe 2022. Again, review the person's medications. I think we've covered this pretty well. And again, be aware that sometimes prescriptions can be interacting with each other in a negative way. Sometimes you see this with sleep issues, things like that. You're on certain drugs that really aren't good for brain functioning, Benadryl, things like that, over-the-counter medications. Talk to your doctor, talk to your pharmacist. So let's again look now at unmet needs as triggers. Okay, some of the basics here. Physical needs, hunger. Again, a person with Alzheimer's disease can't always tell you they're hungry or they have to go to the bathroom. So keep an eye out for their patterns around that, because this can be an area that can cause some agitation and stress. Emotional needs, loneliness, sadness, and anxiety. Now, I'm sure some of you on the webinar today work in professional settings. Maybe you're a CNA, an activity director, or a caregiver working in assisted living. I want to remind you that loneliness is a huge challenge for us, and isolation, particularly with the pandemic. So it's very powerful, I think. In my books, the Best Friends books, we talk about 30 things you can do in 30 seconds or less, or little 1 or 2 minute engagements. And I want you to remember that even on a busy day, you can sit with somebody, give them a little hand massage, you can compliment them on their necktie they're wearing, you can talk to them about their career. Mother, I can't believe you won the Nurse of the Year award for 3 years in a row in Cincinnati. These little moments of engagement truly add up. And so I think it's very important to remember that activities are an essential part of quality of life. And I think when people are busy and engaged with activity, behaviors fall. So again, what are some other unmet needs? Physical needs, emotional needs, need for engagement, meaningful engagement. Try to come up with a project, maybe making dog biscuits for the local animal shelter, sorting out drawers, putting together, writing your holiday cards together, arranging flowers. I think we all have a need to be needed, and this lack of self-esteem and purpose can also be triggering for behavior. So again, try to create a lively, interesting day. I think in so many ways is this treatment for Alzheimer's disease. Again, behavior can tell you that something is going on, so pay attention whenever you can. So a few environmental triggers. I've already mentioned clutter and lighting. Noise. Is the environment noisy, making the person uncomfortable, overstimulated, or unable to hear others? Lighting. Is the environment too dimly lit for the person to see where they're going, raising the risk of falls? Is there glare from windows? The older eye, I can't remember the exact number, I think it's something like 7 or 8 or maybe even 10 or 12. They need a lot more light than the rest of us. So be aware of lighting in your home. Try to get better light sources, increase lighting. Natural light, of course, is wonderful. Do be aware that the opposite is true, though. Too much light. Glare can be physically painful for the older eye. So if you've got windows and someone's sitting in the kitchen or a family room and the sun is, again, hitting their eyes, this can be a trigger for agitation or behavior. And then finally, contrast. The person with dementia is trying to kind of navigate their way through the world. And let's say you have a bathroom where everything's white, the white floor, the white paint and the white commode. They may not even be able to see what's in there. So put that kind of black lid on the toilet bowl, put in a strip along the baseboard that's a different color. High contrast colors, easy to read, all of these things can be very, very helpful, particularly in professional settings as well. Environmental triggers in-home care. The progression of dementia calls for appropriate changes to the environment, even within the familiarity of a home. So again, remove clutter and kind of reconsider the home almost as you would a care community. You want to Alzheimer's proof your home. Be aware of having the water temperature not being too high. Grab bars are very important. Fall risk, get rid of little area rugs people can fall on. And of course, we haven't talked a lot today about wandering and elopement, but you can maybe put some things on doors, at least will sound some alarms if someone does get up at 2 in the morning and wants to leave the house. Life story work is a key element of the best friends approach in contemporary memory care. I know my friends at Trilogy do a lot of work when someone's new to the building to discover their hobbies and interests and talents. You see, a person with dementia may not be able to tell you that they're born in New Orleans and they love Tabasco sauce and hot sauce. If someone moves into a really good memory care neighborhood, you've hopefully done that good work so you can offer them their Tabasco sauce on the meatloaf. So life story is something that I think is really powerful. Now, a few of you may be saying, well, gosh, David, it's my mother. I know her life story. Well, still, we do know these things, but try to kind of dig a little bit deep and think about her life and some elements that make her proud or some key elements. And you might even consider doing like a little top 10 card at home of her life story. So let's say she does have to go to the hospital, or she goes to a day program, or you maybe have an in-home worker come in to help out now and then. You want to be able to give them this little top 10 card about my mother, about her likes and dislikes and preferences to help them make a better connection. When it comes to behavior, the life story can give us some clues of things that still give them pleasure or some skills they have or activities they might enjoy. They can also do the opposite in a sense, but you can also discover problem areas. Maybe someone has bad wartime memories. Maybe in this example, the person's afraid of dogs, right? And maybe not everyone knows that. So you want to be careful to know that if they're afraid of dogs, you want to make sure they don't go to the pet therapy program. They may not be able to say, I'd rather not do it. Instead, they may come and have that stress and agitation. Trauma is very interesting. Again, could be a whole other talk. But you know, it's fascinating. Our brains, one of my friends who's a neuroscientist tells me that our brains are programmed to remember happy memories over sad memories, with the exception of trauma. So often our memory, we often forget some of those sort of sad, negative things, but trauma does remain. And if your family member does have trauma in their life, maybe work with professionals to develop a good care plan and figure out what would be the best way to help them overcome that. Certainly empathy, understanding, I'm here for you. You know, particularly if someone's having hallucinations, you never want to say, now, you just imagine that, that's not true, everything's fine. Hallucinations can be very real, very profound. You want to make sure that you help them feel that you're there for them. Knowing topics that are negative for the person can, again, help you respond sensitively to when they do come up. Okay, a life story. Know some ways to skillfully redirect the person when needed. A redirection, let's say that mom is at the door, she thinks she's late for work, she wants to go. You can't just drag her away from there. You want to try to skillfully engage her. So listen to what they're saying. Oh my gosh, Mom, you're late for work. Well, I think today might be your day off. Let's talk about that. I want to hear more about your work. Show empathy. Mom, I know being on time is very important to you, and let's make a schedule for the week, okay? Bring up a favorite subject or key element. You redirect somebody by saying, Mother, what's this I remember that you always made the best cheesecake? Would you teach me your recipe? Hey, I pulled out a few of your old cookbooks. I'm having a party next week. I could sure use your help. Would you help me figure out a good way to make your famous meatloaf? And again, these are the kinds of things you can do to kind of redirect someone from going one direction that you don't want them to be going to. And of course, very basic, but offer favorite treats or activities. I find that many of my friends and people with dementia, they may say no to 100 things, but they rarely say no to ice cream. So again, things like that, a favorite treat can be very, very helpful, particularly if you know that they have a certain flavor that they like. Offer them their chocolate chip or their black walnut ice cream or whatever they particularly always enjoyed and loved. So again, when a person's upset, we want to treat them the way any of us want to be treated. So if your mother's agitated or upset, start with the basics. Ask them what's wrong. They may not be able to tell you, but you might gain some insight as to what is happening. Sit with them for a minute. Be present. Let them know you're there. Let them know that you're there and they can feel safe and secure and valued. Show concern, show affection, maybe offer a treat or beverage. Again, life story work. If you know that this person was born on a farm and loved growing up in a small town, talk to her about it. Bring back some of these happy memories. These are the ways we can kind of begin to shift the mood from that agitation to a sense of calm. Okay? My friend Virginia, who I'm kind of excited to honor today, she'll be 100 years old this year. So many elders have had productive and meaningful lives. Activity and purpose supports happiness and calms and lowers the chances of behavior that is challenging. So let's kind of end my presentation today by, again, trying to give you some ideas about ways to, I think, increase happiness and increase engagement, increase connection. And I like to say that when it comes to dementia care, Boredom is the enemy. Boredom is the enemy. So there's a lot you can do if you're at home to, I think, kind of amp up your activities and make things better. Music, probably one of the most effective things. There's actually research that people with Alzheimer's disease retain song lyrics and music even longer than they do spoken or written language. So bring on the music. Maybe get one of those smart speakers that you can say, Alexa, play Frank Sinatra or play country western music or play Dolly Parton. Make sure you have music playing, Broadway musicals, musical television programming, music, The Music Man, or things like that can be very good. So music, again, can be very therapeutic. I remember years ago, I had a caregiver who tell me that she could put on Nat King Cole and some of the great music in the bedroom when she was trying to get her husband up in the morning. And she'd be playing, I think to myself, what a wonderful world. And the husband would start singing it, and they'd kind of dance their way into the bathroom, dance their way into the shower, and that music helped her turn that no from yes. Exercise. I find that many people with dementia kind of love it when you talk to them about, hey, let's use it or lose it, and kind of get going. Doctor's orders, mom, doctor wants you to have some exercise. So you can, look on YouTube for the chair yoga classes or Tai Chi, or get some of these TheraBand stretches, or say, Mom, I need some exercise today. I need a walk. Would you come with me? I could sure use your company. Versus, Mother, the doctor says you need to exercise. Make it engaging. Chores, organizing drawers, baking together, cleaning, dusting, sweeping, making the bed together. Even though maybe your family member doesn't do it quite as well as they used to, I think that can be really a sweet thing to engage them in. Again, this feeling of purpose and productivity. Time with children and pets, doing things for others. I'm a big fan of making dog biscuits to local animal shelter, writing letters to first responders, wrapping presents together, flower arrangements, word games, and trivia. It's quite extraordinary, but the way our brain works, even someone who's quite demented, they may still know these old saying. It's raining cats and dogs, waste not, want not. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. So having some fun with oversized word games, old sayings. You can Google, one of my favorites, just Google old animal sayings. There's a million of them that are really fun to do. And of course, spiritual and religious activities. Not everybody is religious, but many people are. So, the rosary beads, prayers, old spirituals, all of that can be really wonderful. Along with just what I call more broader spiritual care, painting, doing arts, reading poetry, being outdoors, being in nature. I think all of us have a spirit that we want to connect to. I think can be very, very powerful. So as I wind down my talk and turn it over to my colleague, Barbara, I just want to, again, thank you all for all the work you're doing. I think many of you are family members. I've been a family member myself for my mother, as well as a professional in this field. Caregiving can be emotionally, financially, and physically stressful. It can be particularly tough when you have a lot of behaviors that are so challenging, refusal to do personal care, things like that. I just want to endorse the Alzheimer's Association for their great helpline that can give you lots of great tips on bathing and behaviors like that. There's certainly some great research on their website. My friends at Trilogy are always willing to, to answer questions or give you some ideas. As you think about the new year ahead, 2022, I want to encourage you to learn all you can. When you're an informed caregiver, everything goes much better. Develop a common script or approach whenever possible. Sometimes there's a behavior, maybe you have 6 siblings and all 6 of you are doing different things. I think that is not a very good recipe for success. So, try to come up with a common theme or common strategy. One of my favorites, for example, a friend of mine who moved his mother to memory care and was kind of fearful about how it would work. He was a little worried because his siblings all had different attitudes about it, and they kind of finally decided to make the move. Well, he sort of scripted everybody. Mom, you need to be here for now. The doctor wants you to be here for now. Mom, you need to build your strength. And I love that kind of affirmative line. Mother, the reason why you're here now, the doctor wants you to be here. You want to build your strength. And actually, after a couple weeks, Mother was sort of the belle of the ball, everyone's favorite, and she really settled in beautifully into memory care. So again, that's much better than 6 different siblings saying 6 different reasons when she says, I want to go home. Again, develop this common approach, common script for a behavior. I think we've covered the Alzheimer's Association. About half my career has been with the association, so really very supportive. And do consider not waiting and waiting and waiting to use services. Make a plan. Most of these dementias are slow and progressive, and so you want to be ahead of the game. You want to make sure your legal financial affairs are in order, you have your plans. I'm a big fan of getting some in-home help if you need some in-home help to start your services. Make sure you try to find someone who's lively and engaging. I love adult day centers because, again, they're community-based. They can really be very helpful in keep getting your person surrounded by activity engagement. And, of course, assisted living for memory care. You see many of them. Pick a place that is engaging and lively, that has a defined philosophy of care. Visit them and decide which one you'd want to go to. You don't want to have to make a decision in an emergency. So, again, be thoughtful as a caregiver, plan ahead, and this is a good way to really come out at the end of this experience feeling proud and really feeling good that you've actually done a great job for your family member and actually being able to give them a certain quality of life throughout this illness. So again, thank you very much for letting me kick off this session today. Just a few more resources. Of course, the Alzheimer's Association has this 24-hour helpline, 800-272-3900. You can read more about my work and the books I've written at the www.bestfriendsapproach.com. And I think thank you to my friends at Trilogy. I think they even have some door prizes today for some free books. And of course, Trilogy's website is there as well. Thank you very much.